Welcome back to my video series VMware Lab. This is version 5, so Lab 5. This lab we will carry forward with our server setups. So what we want to do is set up a Ubuntu server. Many of you not sure how to pronounce this word, Ubuntu, most people say. It's actually pronounced Ubuntu, so Ubuntu. So I'll try and keep that correct here in this video. What we'll also need to do is download the server version. So let's go download, go to server. We want to download the server version. Now you can use either version. I'm using 16.04.4 LTS, long-term support. It's good until April 2021. So this is what I grabbed. So I download this, have the ISO file ready for our VMware install. And I also download a tool called Putty. This Putty tool will allow us to connect from our Windows 10 machine into the VM. So we will use the VM from the VMware console, but we will also want to connect from our Windows 10 machine to show that we can connect from a machine to another machine. Because even though this is sitting on my machine here, it's virtual, so it's technically on the network. So from the network connection, we can connect to here the test that we're able to get from one machine to another. So without further ado, let's get started with our VMware Lab 5. So we go to VMware Workstation, new virtual machine. I'm going to do custom, next. Workstation 12 is what we're using. And we will also say install another operating system later. So next, we want to choose Linux. Now, Linux will have Ubuntu 64-bit. Let's go with 64-bit. Next. And we will also put it on our folder we want to create. So VMware Lab, we'll create Ubuntu, we'll call it 16.04, so we know what version. So there's what there. Next. Now you can name it anything you want. I'm just going to leave it default. Next. One processor. I'm not really pushing this to be a multi-user environment, so one processor is perfect for this. Memory, 1 GB is all it needs. I usually give it 2 just to help it out a bit. More memory, why not have some more memory? It's not like Windows, it doesn't need to be a memory hog, so it doesn't use a ton of memory to do its simple tasks. And because our labs are just meant for 1 user, 2 users, and just yourself playing with it, keep it small so you can have multiple servers running. Let's go next. And we will go with NAT translation. Now, in order to connect from my PC into here, I want to, usually you leave it on NAT if you want to give it its own IP address, such as other connections. In my VMs, I've been using bridging to bridge it to my network adapter to here. So this way I can connect directly into it. So let's use bridging for now. And I'll show you how to change that. Well, so next, default. Let's go again with the default. Create a virtual machine. And let's give this 30 gigabytes because future lab, I will show you some other things such as my previous video, lab 3 was a domain controller, and I mentioned about setting up Linux, yeah, Linux, to go into a domain controller. So a future lab will connect it all together, but this lab is just to create the VM. So 30 gigabytes of disk space, next, name, default, and let's finish. There you go. So our server is created. Now what we want to do is actually install an operating system, which is Ubuntu. So let's go edit virtual machine, go to the DVD, and we want to change it to the ISO image. Now go wherever you downloaded your ISO from here is where you want to point this to. So in my case, I put it in my downloads folder, and right there, 1604. Okay, so now it has the ISO. Let's click OK. Just confirm everything here is fine. And now we have the CD attached. So this is like plugging in a CD to a physical machine. So let's power on. Sometimes the installers take a long time. Linux is very quick, so we'll just go through this very quickly. So the default is English. If you're from another country in different language, you could choose the one you wish, but my video here will be in English. And so make sure you click into the VM. If you need to get out of the VM, push Control Alt. That brings your cursor back to bring it outside. So click in the VM, and this will be a command line, so you need a keyboard. So let's choose English, hit enter. We choose anything we want here. We want to install Ubuntu server. Enter again. That's okay if you see that failed CPU. So now we want language as English. Again, if you choose another language for your own personal use, you can. And default here is United States. I'm going to change it to Canada because that's where I'm from. And now you can have it test keyboards. We don't want to detect keyboards. If we want, you can. So why not? Let's see. Instead of doing that, no, let's use no. I forgot the pain in the butt this could be. So as it says here, you could try and have it detect your keyboard by typing keys. I just want to pick my keyboard because you can type certain keys to have it detect. If you want to try that, go right ahead. But default is no. Let's go with no. And the keyboard I want to use is English US. Again, change it to your keyboard type if you're from a different country or region. And again, English US again. Choose the one you wish. And so now it's going to start installing. Now this video should be pretty quick and simple, getting this OS installed. So you'll notice at the bottom here, pull my cursor back out here, on the bottom here, so when you're done installing, you click finish. So the reason why you click finish here is because the VMware has some functions it can install certain features. So when we click finish, it just gets rid of this little window. So go through to install. You can see it's installing now. Now I love how this says this may take some time. If you're familiar with installing Windows, this may take some time. It doesn't move anywhere near this speed. Maybe this is a joke toward Windows. I'm not sure, but I don't install Linux that often. I've been trying to lean over to Linux to change some things up, such as make file servers and so forth. But with this future labs I will create for this series of videos I'm making, I'm going to maybe head over that way and maybe make a convert of myself to Linux from Windows. Okay, so back to the install. Please enter hostname. So the hostname is default Ubuntu or Ubuntu, sorry. Okay, you could tab. So once you click back in there, you could tab around. So let's tab to continue. I'm going to leave the name Ubuntu. You could change it if you wish. Full username. So put my username. Again, you can tab, continue. And it'll bring up your username. You just type, keep the same username, tab to continue, and a password. And you have to type it a second time. And this is a touchy subject for some. Some places prefer to encrypt your data. This is a VM, so nobody's going to steal my VM. So I'm not worried about encrypting because it is a lab. But if you are in a real world situation, such as the health sector, encryption is a big part of protecting your data. So you might want to say yes. But in a VMware lab, this testing, I'm going to say no. And it's going to guess your time zone. This one actually guessed it correctly. So because it's correct, I will say yes. If it isn't correct, you can say no and then choose your time zone. So I will say yes here. Now it's going to detect our hardware. At this point, it should find our disk. Now, we have a choice here, use entire disk or using LVM. So just to make it easier for now, we'll explain LVM and everything later. But for now, let's just go with the default, which is entire disk, and set up LVM. So here we are. We choose the disk that we created, which is 32 gig. We said 30 gig, but it actually works out to be 32.2 gigabytes of disk space. So let's click enter. And of course, now you're going to make the change. Now LVM, before the logical volume manager tool, right, can be configured. Current partition scheme has rewritten to disk. So now we've made those changes. So we've made all those proposed changes to make a disk. And now it wants to know if we want to write them. So we want to say yes. And now in this case here, we could break up the partition to different sizes. In this case, again, for this lab purpose, we will leave it default. Tab to continue. Enter. And once again, it's now saying, okay, here's all your choices you've made. Now the default I'm just going to pull my cursor out here to show you. The default, we chose just to let the operating system take care of the sizes. Now, if you're a Linux expert, you can go ahead and make your custom disks and so forth. But because we're testing this as a lab, let's just go with the defaults. It will create its partitions, and it'll first swap and root and swap space and disk space. It has an ext2. So it will automatically configure partitions the way you want them. So we will just click back in here, and we want to stay on yes and hit enter. So for the most part, you could go through a default install of Ubuntu, and if you're using CentOS or Red Hat, they're all pretty similar. Ubuntu is amongst the easiest, I guess. People have said that it has been amongst the easiest one to install and work with and get into Linux to play. There's several different variants. There's Mint, there's Cent. Cent is based on Red Hat. If you're familiar with Red Hat and Fedora and all those other versions. There's plenty of different versions of Linux. This is probably why a lot of people are scared of using it, because Windows is Windows. It's made from Microsoft. Linux could be made by hundreds of different variations out there. And it's similar to the reason why people choose iPhone over Android, because the operating system is stable. It's one place that makes it. You always can trust the source of the data. With Linux, you can customize it all you want. You can make your own. So it's very flexible, so to speak. So for our case here, we're just using Ubuntu. Setting up, running. I've set up plenty of Ubuntu servers in the past, as well as some Cent servers, CentOS. So while this finishes installing, it's not that long of an install. It's usually about 5 minutes total for the installation of the operating system, which is pretty good. And we'll be prompted for a few more questions at the end, such as the booter, the installer of the installation of the booter. So when the system boots up, it can boot automatically into the operating system, or you can have a custom setup. So while we're waiting, let's pull my cursor out here. So you might want to go download your Putty, and when you download and install it, here's Putty here. A Putty is if you're familiar with Telnet, Putty, you can use Telnet to get into a system. It's a command line way of getting into an operating system such as Linux, or if you're connecting to Cisco switches and so forth. SSH is more the secure sockets handler, so secure. It's more of a secure Telnet. So SSH is a common way of connecting into an Ubuntu server or Linux server as well. So just going to close this for now and go back here. Now we're being prompted for HTTP proxy. Now we don't have any HTTP proxies here. in this lab, so we will skip configuration of this because we don't really need it. Again, if you do require this, you could put in your proxy. So let's tab to continue and hit enter, and it's going to install some more files. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, we have a domain controller set up here, a Windows domain controller. We will connect, in future videos, we will connect our Ubuntu server into an Active Directory domain. Some people ask, well, why would it want to do that? Well, if you're familiar with the world of Windows licensing, if you have a file server and you have 10 users that need to connect to that to files on a Windows file server, you have to pay a user license for users to connect to the shares. So it's a Windows access license. They call them CALs, client access licenses. Well, the advantage of using Ubuntu is there is no licensing. It's free operating system. This is free. I do not have to pay for it. If I run into troubles and I need some support, I can go to the community. So I'll just go back here. You can go into the community resources here and you can find support. There's community support. So there's free people, or you can pay for supporting this. Where Windows comes with a support model as well. Sometimes you have to pay for it if you don't have a certain licensing. So, but when you set up Windows servers to connect to, users to go to Windows servers file shares, you need to have client access licensing. Where with Ubuntu, you don't. So you could set up a pile of file servers with free access to them. So the only thing you have to pay for is your Windows 10 on your main machine and your domain controller, CALs, that's it. So this is one way of keeping your costs lower. This is why an Ubuntu server or Ubuntu server or Linux server is sometimes applicable in environments. So back to the install. So now we want to decide what to do here with updates. Now, if you're familiar with Windows updates, we always want to say automatically. In a server environment, it's not always good to have automatic updates because it could automatically reboot. In our test environment, it's good to keep it secure. And even in a production environment, you might want to install automatically. I have not played too much with the in security updates installations automatically with Ubuntu or Linux. So for this lab, let's do this, and then a future lab, maybe if we see something come up, we can create our lab on what we saw. So let's go with the install security automatically. So, and also to mention, with Windows updates come out once a month. Patch Tuesday, everybody's Patch Tuesday, I believe it's called. Microsoft releases patches on the second Tuesday of every month, and then everybody installs their patches to go forward, and that's all Windows versions. So back to the install Ubuntu. So we have some choices here on what packages to install. Now, depending on what we want to do with this server, we could choose configurations to set things up. So let's start with Open SSH, and you just use your arrow key and hit space to highlight it. So default is the standard utilities and Open SSH server. So in a future video, we will talk about how to install Samba, and that's basically Samba is a way of making shares on a Linux server to allow Windows users to see them. We'll go further into that in a future video, how to install Samba. So without installing that for now, we will just stick with the Open SSH server. And let's say continue. So now what we've done is we created a basic Ubuntu server, and we've installed the SSH tools so we can connect to the server from tools like Putty. And in Putty, as mentioned earlier, we could then use SSH. We just have to put the IP address of this machine. So we will configure that once this is installed. We will reboot, and then we will install Vm Tools in here. here. So while that's installing, I'll show you what that means. So when I right click on here, install VMware Tools. What VMware Tools does is installs an agent, I'll say, just to make it easier for you to understand. It installs a series of little parts and pieces into the VM. And what those parts and pieces are is drivers. So video drivers, mouse drivers, keyboard drivers, things like that. Also a little agent. In the ESX world, so if you use VMware not on a workstation, but in a professional environment where you have vSphere and everything, what you need is an agent, and the agent talks to the vSphere and it gives it a heartbeat. So it tells it the status, the health status of the VM. So that installing the VM tools in this case will give us drivers. So the video, so let's go here, settings. So it'll give us the display drivers, if there's printer driver, anything it needs, network adapter drivers, all those items into this VM, just like you would install Windows. So when you install Windows, you need to install your video drivers, keyboard drivers, mouse drivers. Most of them are installed by default from the CD, from Windows installation. But because we're using VMware, we need to install the tools just to make sure the VM is operating properly in that VM environment. Now, some people don't like to install them or don't know how to install them. Once we get completed here, we will show you how to install the VM tools. Doing a little bit of cleanup. I'll click back in my window here. So like I said before, you hit Control Alt and bring your window out. Your mouse, sorry, bring back to the operating system. So while this is completing, let's go to my Windows VM. And you notice in Windows, they always have hit Control Alt Delete. Now in the VM, I have to hit Control Alt Insert, and that brings up. So just to give you something here to more knowledge of the VMware workstation tools. Let's go back to Ubuntu. So now we need to install the Grub installer. Now this is basically a bootloader. So think of this as when your computer is booting up, you want a menu. This gives you the menu of installing. So if you have a dual boot, if you're on a physical machine, you could dual boot between Windows and Linux and so forth. So the Grub installer, the bootloader, will go into the master boot record of the drive. So let's go yes. Let's do a yes as a default here. So now it's installing the bootloader. Now, if any of you are watching, you're familiar with Linux and you're like, get on with it, get on with it. Sorry for being so slow for you, but this is also a video for anybody to learn and watch. As all my videos are, I try to go down to the basics, install, and then go forward. Sometimes I might start at an advanced level, but I apologize to anybody who can't follow. Just slow the video down or pause it, catch up, and then rewind it. You can do that in YouTube. So the installation is now completed. So we will make sure our mouse is in here, and we'll click enter for continue. Hit enter. I keep saying click. Everybody's stuck in the mouse world. So now it's just unmounting. It's going to reboot. There you go. There's the VMware. And there's the Grub right there. See how it shows the menu. Okay, so it's booting up. And see how it's auto sizing? Well, this is where the graphics drivers come in handy. With this being a Linux server, I must warn you, there's no GUI, no desktop like how Windows has a desktop here. It's all command line. So for those of you who are not familiar with command line, welcome. And any of you who are Mac users out there, just to give you some sad news, did you know your Mac version, your Mac OS 10, since porting from the old PowerPC and Motorola chips over to Intel, they had to rebuild the operating system. So what they did is they built it on a BSD, a Linux BSD core. So underneath your Mac nice shiny OS is Linux. So sorry to burst your bubble out there. So yeah, so Linux for the win, I guess. So now we have here the Boon To Login. As you see, the version we're using. So the login, just gonna hit enter here to get it back again, the cursor there. So the user I created was CompuGuy. So make sure you type in the username you created during the install. Enter, it's going to ask for your password. Now in a lab, I recommend using a standard, just a small password. You can do capital P password, so it's password. You can do that to get in. So now we're installed, we're logged on to the machine. So like as I said earlier, there's no graphical user interface. So the first thing we want to do is let's check a directory. So if you're familiar with Windows, the DOS version of Windows, you can hit dir. There's nothing there. So in Linux, you type ls, and again, there's nothing there. So let's change directory and go up one layer. So let's do dir and ls. They're the same command. ls gives you color. So that's just giving you a listing of what's there. So from this point, if you haven't done the cd / do the cd / and now we want to install, get my mouse back here, we want to say finish installing. That gets rid of that little bar. We want to right click on the VM and we want to say Reinstall Vm Tools. Now it may say install, it's okay. Because I clicked finished, that's why it says installing. So it will not automatically install in a non-graphical environment. So you need to install the VMware tools manually. So let's click back in our VM. Now we have it set up for installing the VM tools. You see down below, make sure you're logged in your operating system and mount the virtual CD. So now what we have to do from the command line is we have to mount the CD. So picture you have put a CD in your computer and now we need to connect to it. Now normally you just go into Windows and click my computer, whichever, but because we're a non-graphical interface here, we have to type some command. So you want to type sudo, so super user do, and basically with Linux, just to give some people who are new to this, you need to tell the computer to do an elevated task because your user is just a user. You need to elevate it. Just like in Windows now annoys you and says, hey, are you sure you want to install this? You need to have administrative rights. Windows is catching up to the way Linux has been doing it for years. So let's carry forward. So what we want to do is make a directory. And we want to name it mnt cd-rom. So we want to make a directory called mount cd-rom. So if you take a good look here, there's a folder called mnt. So basically you're going in the mnt folder and you're creating a directory called cd-rom. Okay, so hit enter and it's going to ask for your password again. Again, this is a secure OS, so it wants to know, are you sure you want to do this? Type your password. It just wants to make sure when you're elevating, because you said super user do this. So you told the super user to make directory. And you had to say super user because normally you can't make a directory. So now we've made a directory. Now we want to mount the CD. So now, just like I said, when you put that CD in the computer, we virtually did it here. So now let's mount the CD. So super user do. And we want to point to the CD. So you want to say mount. And now we want to point to that virtual CD-ROM. So that disk. And then we want to mount it to the folder we just created. So basically this mounts the CD to that folder because Linux is all about files and folders. Now it says it's write protected. Well, because CDs are technically write protected, you can't write to a CD unless you have a CD writer. In this case here, it's a read-only disk, as it says. So now let's take a look at this. So we say ls, and we want to save the folder name, mnt cd-rom. So there's all the tools on the mnt cd-rom. So let's now, we want to extract, see that red file there, the tar.gz. So this is like a zip file. So we want to extract it to another folder so we can actually install the tools. You want to type tar xz or z vf space /mnt. Just follow along on the screen here. CD-ROM, and then here's where I cheat. / I'm going to type capital V, capital M, and hit tab, and it should fill in that name. So this way you don't have to type all that name out. You just hit tab and it just fills in the name because it fills in what's left over of VM. And then what we want to do is say space. So we have a space there. Dash or hyphen, capital C, space, / tmp /. Hit enter. And now it'll extract all these files to that folder we just created. What we want to do is now we want to change directory to that temp folder. And now it created a folder, as you see above there, VMware Tools Distrib. So we want to type VM and hit tab again. And see how it says dash. So we want to type T and hit tab again. So VMware dash tools or hyphen tools hyphen distrib. So that's where we want to be. Hit enter again. And now we're in that folder. Now we could just see what's in there by saying ls. Now there's the files. So now what we need to do is we need to install a file. Now in Windows you would click on an executable or a nice icon, has a nice little picture on it, and it would install the file, like install or something like that, or setup. In VMware, or sorry, yes, in Linux, we now have to type superuser_do because we want super user to install this. You want to type decimal or period / and type VM and hit tab, and it fills in that. And then we want to make sure there's a space and hyphen or -d. So as you see, there's VMware install.pl, and we hit enter, and it's going to install your drivers, the agent pieces, and this will allow it to communicate with VMware Workstation. Once we have that installed, we will reboot the VM, and now we have Ubuntu Linux installed, the Linux server, and we also have the VMware tools installed. And then after that, what we want to do is, right now this is using a dynamic address. So on my network, I have a router that hands out IP addresses, as you probably do in your house with your Wi-Fi router. It hands out IP addresses to your machines. So from the computing level, they all have an address, just like your house does. So the address we want to make sure we have is a static address. So I'll show you how to make a static IP address in Linux as well. So let's do sudo. Get my mouse back here. Type sudo reboot. And it will reboot. Everything, all the services shut down. The computer reboots. There's your Grub menu. It's nice seeing all those lines pass through. You don't know, you may not know what they are, but as long as you're seeing them move and you're seeing okay, that's always a good sign. If you ever see a failed, you might want to look it up what it is. So, but in this case, everything went well. And now we want to log in again. So again, that login name you created, password, and now we're logged in. Now from here, remember what I said, an IP address. So let's see if config. So interface config, hit enter, and you see, I'm gonna pull my mouse back out here. Our address is 192.168.0.130. Now that was given to the computer from my router. Now every time I boot up, this could change. So I won't be able to find this on the network if I wanted to connect to it. So remember what I said earlier, Putty. Let's go to Putty, right? Let's type in that address, 192.168.0.130. So we will connect using SSH and see what happens. Okay, now first time you connect to it, it says the host key is not cached. So we want to say yes, because basically we want to connect to this machine. So log in as same user that you logged in your Linux machine, if you're following along, and of course the password. And there we go. So I'm now on the same machine from my computer, Windows 10, and this is Linux. So just to give you an idea, whatever I type here, it won't show up here. It's just a different session. So you don't have to be inside the VM. So I could be over here and still be with my Linux install. So let's click back here so we can see that. So these are called terminal windows. This is a terminal window from my computer, from Windows 10, and this is the actual server in a VM. So for the rest of my tasks now, let's just do it from the telnet, or the SSH, sorry. So ls, there's nothing there, so let's go again, cd, and there you go. See? To go over here, type same thing, plus the exact same thing. So this is just a way of, if you're familiar with Windows, how you remote connect, you do RDP. When you remote connect to a machine, you can then hop onto another machine. But because it's non-GUI, non-graphical, I'm right here on the command line. So now we know our IF config, interface config, is showing that we are right here, 192, right? I want to change that. So how we change this is we need to go into a folder named C, so CD, so change directory, /etc network interfaces. Hit enter. See how we're not in there? So, and that's because the folder is actually network. And there we go. So we're in, and the file we're trying to edit is interfaces. So in order to edit a file in Linux, a lot of people say Vim or VI. I like using nano. So what we need to do is we need super user do, so sudo, and then nano, and then the file name is interfaces. Now we could have done this by just going sudo nano and then doing the path. So again, if you're Linux experienced, sorry if I'm dragging this slow for you. Network, and we want to type interfaces. So if I hit enter here, it's going to ask us for a password because we're super usering, and this will show you the contents of that file. So now if I hit Control X, as you can see, go here, that's control that arrow up. Control X will exit the file. So Control X gets me out of the file because I want to edit it over here. So same thing, we can go into the folder direct network, and then we can edit the file interface. So let's do that again. Ask for the password, and we're in the same file. And what we want to do is we want to change the information on this network adapter. So the network adapter primary interface is auto ENS33. So iFace interface ENS A33 iNet, so internet, TCP/IP protocol. So DHCP. Now we want to change that static. Type static. Wrong key here, so go to the other side. Delete. So change that, static, hit enter, and I usually tab out a bit. Want to type address. Now, if you know the address of your network you want to use, you want to type 192, in my case is 192.168.0. Now, I'm just going to pop out here for a sec. And I have a computer called DC. So I want to bring up a Windows command line. And I want to ping DC. Now, I believe that one's called DC 2012. There you go. Now, if you've been following my previous videos, DC 2012, I gave it an address of 20. So what we want to do is I want to ping 192.168.0. Now, chances are this one here is 21, 22 is my previous videos if you've been following. So I'm going to try 23. And there's no response from 23, right? So now back to here, I'm going to give this machine the address of 23. So we'll just leave this one here for now. I'm going to give this machine, which is our Ubuntu machine, an address of 23. And we want to now call netmask. Two 255.255.255.0. Now, if you're not familiar with networking, that would be a different video entirely. But the netmask, the default netmask, this is a class C. So we here enter next line. Want to say network. Now, in this case here, network. The reason what this is for is what network you're in. So in this case, we're in the 192.168 network. And we'll say 0.0, because as you see, the 192.168.0.23, that's my subnet I'm in. So the network I'm in is 192.168, and this here is 0 because it's 0 and 0. So I'm putting that network in. So again, follow your IP addressing. If you're using a 10.10, then you'd say 10.10.0.0. In most cases, anybody else using a home setup like I am in your virtual lab, this is your IP addressing. You're probably following 192.168.1 or 2, but check your network by pinging. Next thing is gateway. This is your default gateway. So in my case, 168.0, my case is 0.1. That's my router. So keep that. Now the next line is DNS name servers. Now if you've been following my videos, I'm trying to set up a domain in our lab so we can connect everything together. So we'll follow this. If you're not using any domain controller and you're just following this video for the how to set up Linux, you could use Google's default of 888. I think they also have 111. In my case, I want to send it to my domain controller because in future video, we will be connecting my domain controller to connect everything together. So I want the domain server, I want this to look up everything to that server. So that server is 192.168.0.20. If you don't have one, again, follow the 8888 setting. And that's it. That's all I need to do now to give this machine an address to talk to my network. So I'm going to hit Control X, and then it's going to ask if I want to save. Hit Y for yes, and the file name is interfaces, so you don't have to change that. Hit enter, and now the file is written. Now what we need to do is after we've set up this change, we want to also reboot our interface. So in the case of this, we want to restart our networking services because it's Linux. We don't need to reboot every time we make a change. So we want to stop and start the service. So we want super user do service, and we want to say networking restart. Now I'm just going to click over here for a sec just to show you. If I type ifconfig right now, it still shows the original address that we had, the 192.168.0.130 right here. That's what it shows still. This machine will still be in that same area as you see above here. But because we've edited the interface file, once we restart the networking interface, as you see, it's restarted a network interface already. Let's type that again over here. Right? See how it's showing there, but let's go over here. I'm just using my arrow up key to go backwards in commands. ifconfig, and there you go. So 130. So for some reason the interface is still staying. So now we want to find out why. So go here. I'm going to ping 23 and see, am I getting a response? Well, isn't that funny? It's responding now. And if I went to Putty, let's see if that same address responds. I just wanted to show you because there's some weirdness that I have seen previously. So now our new address of this machine here should be this. Let's click open. And it again says, hey, I haven't never connected to this machine because it's a different IP. Say yes. So you guy, the password. So again, you can log in as your username and password. Now let's type ifconfig. Now I'll tell you why this works. We'll see how it's showing the old address still. So DHCP is still showing. So let's go back right here and let's restart the interface again, and let's go back to ifconfig. It's still showing you all the IP. So in this case here, we will do a sudo reboot. Should not have to do this, but I've noticed in some cases it does take a bit for this machine to see it. So because we just rebooted the machine, in the background it's rebooting, but these errors come up. It's because my telnet sessions or my SSH settings have dropped because the server disappeared. So let's close these sessions, and this one here as well. Right? So it's inactive because I rebooted. I just kicked myself out of the telnet or the SSH settings. So we just rebooted the machine, back in, and click in here, and there we go. And ifconfig. So interface config, it's now showing the proper IP. So even though it was responding here, it just wasn't showing here. So a reboot just corrected that setting. As I said, you generally do not have to reboot a Linux machine, but sometimes we have to stop the interface and make it go down and make it come back up. So that command I typed with the reboot, we could then simply just type, you can restart the Ethernet 0 command. So there's other commands to use, such as restart Ethernet 0 with sudo if down and then if up. So you could do this, sudo if down. Now, what was our Ethernet adapter, right? So let's say eth 0, and then and if up Ethernet 0. So that will ask you now for your password. And there you go. So notice how it says unknown interface. Well, ifconfig. So if we go back to that file that we just edited, so let's go cd, or actually let's just do it right here. So let's type sudo nano /etc /network /interfaces. We're going to edit the file we edited. So the network interface is called ENS33. So let's hit Control X. And let's go back to that command. Just use your arrow up. And see how I said Ethernet 0? Let's use our arrow keys to go back here. Now, the interface is called ENS33. Same thing with here. ENS33. So now we have the right interface name. So right here it says permission denied, right? Unable to open lock file. Now, if you see an error like that, again, this is Linux is a basic tutorial. I don't want to get deep into things. So if you can't get it, you haven't got permission to do so. The command I showed you earlier to stop and start, so go back. Commands right there. So I'm just using my arrow up and arrow down key. You can go through all the commands you've ever typed. So if you're doing repetitive typing, you just use your arrow up key to bring up the commands again. So if I want ifconfig, there you go. And we'll go back to that command here. The server's networking restart. That's the common command you're going to use in an Ubuntu setup here. So in this lab, we'll just reboot the machine anytime we need to. I know Linux lovers will stop rebooting machines. You don't have to. It's fine. It's just a lab. So we fix the problem by just rebooting, and that's generally how most of your diagnostics out there in the world. Reboot the server. It should fix your problems. The underlying cause sometimes is just a patch, whichever it could be. But at this point here, we've done the installation, we've set up VM tools, and we've given the machine an IP address. Again, to confirm, just going to ping, and a ping is just a test to see if the machine is online. We see it's working. We go to Putty, and let's make sure it's working by using the address. 3, and we're using SSH. We're going to open, and there you go. So let's log in again. And there you have it. So that concludes this video, lab 5, sorry. So this video is about how to install Ubuntu, sorry. Keep saying it wrong. Right here. So we have Ubuntu 16.04.4 installed, as it says here, long-term support. And now we're ready to go for our next video, which we will talk about how to connect it to the domain like we did the last servers. So I will carry on this video series as far as I can get it. Hopefully we get like 30-40 videos inside of this lab. I like building my VMware lab. I'll eventually show you the other stuff, like installing Mac OS inside of one of your VMs. This way you could test and Raspberry Pi and so forth. So thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, come back for more videos in the future. Thanks very much.